Sorry about that. Alright, slideshow. Alright, so we're gonna talk about, first we're just gonna do, a little bit of grammar review and things, like usual, and then we're gonna move on to fiction, creative writing. Alright, so this is, some grammar review. So first, um, we're gonna talk about a comma splice, and this is basically an incorrect way to write a sentence where you connect two independent clauses with a comma. So solutions to fix this is to just put a period in between the two independent clauses, or use a coordinating conjunction or a subordinating conjunction, or even putting a semicolon in between because a semicolon, remember, you put in between two independent clauses, and it's basically um, there in the place of a period. So, and then we're going to talk about subject or verb agreement, which is where the subject and the verb match in plurality. So yeah, we'll expand on that later, a little later. Um, and then capitalization and contractions, you guys know these. It's just remember to capitalize proper nouns. So that's like names, in specific places, like states and countries and cities and all that. And then days of the week, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then holidays. And then contractions, where the apostrophe is just in the place of some letters of two words. So there would stand for they are, we're is we are, I've is I have, and we'll is we will. So so yeah, comma splice exercises. And remember, comma splices, it's just two independent clauses joined with a comma, and we want to add a transition word um in the middle, or a semicolon, or any of these solutions. So I'll just do the first one. Um so John is always late for work. Nobody seems to care. So since those are two contradictory statements, you can put a but after the comma. So if you said John is always late for work, but nobody seems to care, that would make it correct. Okay. So, let's move on to number 2. So, hot summer weather is nice. High temperatures are dangerous for certain people. Okay, so what do you think, what do you guys think that is? Oh, hello, Mia. We're just doing some comma splice exercises. Uh, wait, if you need a quick explanation, basically comma slices are just two independent clauses joined with a comma, and it's an incorrect form of writing a sentence. So the solutions are to add a period, or a coordinating or subordinating conjunction, or a semicolon in the middle of the two independent clauses. So, so yeah, to fix John is always late for work, nobody seems to care, you would add a but in the middle. So John is always late for work, but nobody seems to care. Okay. Okay. Oh yeah, that's correct. So hot summer weather is nice, but high temperatures are dangerous for certain people, since those two sentences contradict each other. So, so number 3. Emily broke her ankle on the weekend. Now she is in a great deal of pain. Right, that's correct. So it's so because she's in a great deal of pain because she broke her ankle on the weekend. So number 4, driving the car is fast and comfortable. Riding the bicycle is better for one's health. Okay, while, yeah, that's correct. So, yeah, it's basically comparing these two. So driving the car is fast and comfortable, while riding a bicycle is better for one's health. So that's good. And then number 5, when a student likes his class, he's more likely to achieve good grades. Okay. Okay, guys, that's actually correct because um like you see there's when in the beginning of the sentence, and that's a subordinating conjunction. So like when you use a subordinating conjunction, it goes at the beginning of the sentence, and you don't need a transition word in the middle. So the sentence is correct. So number 6, Jared had an interview with a television company. I might get a job as his assistant. Okay, okay, so would work for that. Like especially if the person I'm talking and Jared are like good friends or something. So um so yeah, and just like notice like for almost all of these examples, you can also just easily replace the comma with like first of all a period, um which might not be that good because you know you want your sentences to flow, or a semicolon, which would actually work pretty well for some of these. So yeah, but thank you for participating. You did really well. So does anyone have like any questions on these comma splices or any of these exercises or anything? Okay, okay, cool. So let's move on to like we're gonna talk about like subject verb agreement. But for that, first you have to understand verb types. So, like verb types in their plurality, basically. So, there's like singular verbs and plural verbs. A singular verb is a verb that has an S added to the verb's present tense. So, like play, and you add an S to it, and it's plays, and reads and runs. And then plural verb is a verb that does not have an S added to it. And the examples oh, okay, well, that's a mistake. Sorry about that. But basically, like, just delete the S in all of these, and that would be a plural verb. And like, you guys might be kind of confused because because if it has an S added to it, to like, it becomes a singular verb. And you know, usually it's the opposite because S means plural, right? But the thing is, singular verb just works for like singular subjects, and then plural verbs work for plural subjects. So just think of it that way. So these are like two examples. So you want to match the verb with the subject, right? So one dog is sitting on the grass. The dog is the subject and is the verb. Um, and then two dogs are sitting on the grass. And that would be plural. So are is the plural version of is. Um, so both of those are correct. And if you want another example with some of these like verbs that maybe might be easier to understand, you could say like the dog plays with the toy. So the dog is one single dog, right? And it plays with the toy because that's a singular verb, and that makes sense, right? And then for a plural verb, it would be the dogs, plural, play with the toy. So you delete the S from play, and then um yeah, like that's the correct way to like say a sentence like that. Um, or you could say the child reads a book, and then versus using a plural verb, which would be the children read the book. So yeah. Any questions on that? Okay. Okay, just remember singular verb is for like one subject and plural verb is for more than one subject. So now let's do some exercises. Okay, so number 1, Annie and her brothers um, either is or are at school. Okay, so is That is incorrect. I think I see where you're thinking, but Annie and her brothers are multiple people, right? So then is would be the singular noun and are is the plural noun. So for multiple people, you would use are. Annie and her brothers are at school. Because if you say Annie and her brothers is at school, that wouldn't make sense, right? Okay, so number two. Either my mother or my father is or are coming to the meeting. Okay, so is incorrect because notice how like they say either my mother or my father. So that's referring to two subjects. That's two people. So like more than one person, right? So then you would still use um the plural noun, which is are. Okay, so number three, the dog or the cats is or are outside. Okay, are is correct. Because the dog or the cats, that's two subjects. So number four, either my shoes or your coat is or are always on the floor. Yeah, that's are again um because my shoes or your coat is two objects, so two subjects. So the puppies plays or play with the toy. Yeah, that's correct. So play would be the plural noun, and there's multiple puppies. So um, play would be the correct answer. So good job on that. Um, does anyone have any questions on like subject verb agreement? All right, all right, cool. Let's move on. So now we're gonna like talk about creative writing. And okay, okay, so like creative writing, like you guys might know that there's like multiple types of creative writing, right? Like there's personal narratives, or there's historical fiction, or like just fantasy and stuff like that. And some of them aren't fiction, like personal narratives, like memoirs, or maybe some poems. But today we're just gonna focus on fiction creative writing, all right? Okay, which is fun. So what is creative writing? So creative writing is a form of writing where creativity is at the forefront of its purpose through using imagination, creativity, and slash or innovation in order to tell a story. There's strong written imagery with an emotional impact, like in poetry writing, short story writing, novel writing, and more. So, like creative writing is like it's basically it's just any writing that uses your creativity, right? So like it's not just stating the facts or like putting down like the information and stuff. It's actually like telling a story. Okay, so these are just some of the elements of fiction creative writing. So number one, these are some important elements. First, there's a setting, like where the story takes place, or the multiple places that the story takes place, are grouped into setting. And then next is the plot, um, which is like the sequence of the story. And then the conflict, like every story has to have a conflict, right? Because without a conflict, like there is no story. It's just you're just kind of telling about what happened, what's like happening with these characters, but the characters actually have to like do things to resolve a conflict. So then that brings us to characters and characterization, which is just how a character is presented. Um, so number two, like to engage the reader, like first, um, you should use character development. Because like when you read a book, the characters don't really stay exactly the same from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, right? You want to make sure that like while you're writing, the character develops or like changes in some way. And yeah, we'll expand on that later. And then start with a problem and solve it by the end of the story. So just with the conflict, um, yeah, that's the problem, right? And then you want to make sure by the end the problem is solved. So you want to have the characters make decisions and do actions in order to solve that conflict. And then tone and atmosphere. So these just aid in creating a gripping story, or like a story that the reader really feels like they're part of. Like, have you ever read something and you feel like you're right there with a character, like going on adventures and stuff? Yeah, that's how you want to feel when you're like reading a story. And basically, the atmosphere can be pretty much anything. It can be dark or happy. It can be calm or it can be like adventurous and things like that. And then tone can be positive, neutral, or negative. So like you might be wondering, like, what's the difference between tone and atmosphere then? Well, atmosphere is just like the kind of mood of the story. So it's like if you pick up a poem about like if you pick up a poem about like mourning like a person or something like that, like the atmosphere is gonna be dark, right? Like it's just the general mood of the piece of writing. And then tone is the way that the author conveys that at the atmosphere. So basically tone is just the way that the author writes or the way that the author talks. So tones like like if it's positive, the author's going to be using a lot of positive words. They're probably going to be talking about more positive subjects and having like um just like just like when you read their work, you feel positive or happy in general. And then for neutral, like they're just getting the story down. They don't like have like any specific emotion. And negative, like so that's like sad or maybe the author might be like angry, sounding angry in some cases. Maybe if they're arguing for something that's really important to them that makes them angry or something. But yeah, so atmosphere is just the mood of the story, and then tone is just the way that the author like talks to convey that basically. And then like descriptive words like sunshine or darkness can help bring out the atmosphere. So like yeah, that's where wordplay like comes to be a part of tone and atmosphere. Because if you see words like sunshine, then you're gonna imagine like sunshine, right? So like sunshine, it's happy, it's warm, it has good connotations. When people see sunshine, they think of like good weather and and it makes them happy. But then like darkness, like when you hear a word like that, it has kind of more negative connotations. Like you think of like some kind of gloomy, dark place, or like um a scary dark closet or something like that. So yeah, that you can definitely use like words and have like this descriptive word choice in order to help uh, like add to the atmosphere basically. And then just active verbs, you're just making the story alive with actions. So like actions, they kind of build up on the story, Because if you have just like people talking or like people just like doing nothing, and just like staying there for like long periods of time, then like the reader's probably gonna get bored pretty quickly, right? So you want to make sure that the characters are like actually doing actions, and you have to make sure like those actions um like move into other actions like really smoothly. So yeah, you definitely don't want to have characters just like sitting there and like talking and like 3 pages of dialogue or something like that, because that can get boring and frustrating for a reader to read. And unless you like manage to execute that really well, which is really rare. So yeah, just usually you just want to make sure like the characters are doing actions and things. So the steps of writing are basically just brainstorming, slash pre-writing, and then drafting, and then finally revising and editing. So these are the steps, but written more detailed. So first is brainstorming. So for brainstorming, you're like all you're doing is just thinking up ideas. So you're thinking up ideas of what to write. And for this, like sometimes you're just like, like going about your day and suddenly this really good idea pops into your mind. Like, has that ever like happened to you guys? Because I know it's happened to me. Um, but then like sometimes um especially if you're not feeling that imaginative on a particular day or something, it's good to like get inspiration in order for the ideas to kind of flow. So you can get like inspiration from like a lot of different ways. Like you can just read another book and like kind of get ideas from that book, or you can even like go on a walk or something and just being around like nature and things can even give you inspiration. Or like you can do pretty much like anything that you enjoy. Or like, like daily life in general gives you inspiration. So even if you're just like going to school or if you're like doing homework, like all of that can like inspire people in some way. Um so then number two, just choose an idea. And that leads into the third step, which is pre-writing. So that's where so pre-writing is just like everything that you do before you start writing. So that's where you start planning and researching if you need it, and outlining the story and interviewing people and more. So some of these are for like pretty specific topics, like for example, like researching and interviewing people. Usually, like sometimes more like some like yeah, like sometimes you're not gonna need to do that, but a lot of books actually do need research, even if they are made up. Because if you're writing about like, for example, a new world, or a new country, like some like country that you made up, you're probably gonna want to research like the systems and things of real countries so that you can base your country like off that, because like even if it's some fantasy world, like that country or that place still has to have a system. Or even if you're doing a fiction story of people like in a country you've never been to, um, then you want to research what that country is like what the culture is like, and what it looks like on the streets, and what the like people like are like, and just like little things like that to make sure your story like is accurate in that environment. And then interviewing people, like that can be really good for if you're writing a character that's really different from you. So like if you're writing about characters of a different race, or maybe they have um, like a different family situation and things like that. You want to make sure, like, first of all, you don't just assume how those people like might feel about their situation or uh like things like that. Like you want to like get that as realistic as you can. So hopefully you can like interview people to see how they feel about it. Or like even like online. Like nowadays there's a lot of content on like different people just um like talking about themselves basically. So yeah, after you're done pre-writing like and like doing all that planning, you want to start drafting. So drafting, you're just like writing a draft. So you're just getting your story down on paper, basically. It and then revising and editing. Oh, sorry. And then revising and editing. You're just refining your writing. Um, okay. So creative writing ideas. So fiction, like I mentioned, it's like it can encompass realistic fiction, fantasy, historical fiction, and science fiction and things like that. So, like some examples of ideas would be like a story about a girl who runs away to try to find her twin sister, or a story about aliens or a time travel machine, a story about a spy during World War II, a story about a pet dragon, and more. So, um, so yeah, it can be pretty much like a lot of things. Like the first one, that could be realistic fiction, right? Because that could happen in real life. And then a story about aliens or a time travel machine would be science fiction, because it has to do with like science or technical things, like usually things having to do with aliens or space are put in the science fiction category. And then a story about a spy during World War II, that's historical fiction, because you're putting fictionist characters in a historical setting. Um, so so yeah, that's another example for if, like when you would have to do research, because like if you're gonna write about a character in World War II, like you definitely have to know like what it was like during World War II, right? And like maybe like how people like lived during World War II and things like that. And then a story about a pet dragon would be fantasy, because a dragon is a fantasy animal. And more. So yeah, you can think of pretty much any ideas that interest you or that you would like to write on. So if you like really can't think of any ideas just off the top of your mind, you can also try generating ideas from a topic. So first, you just pick a topic um that like interests you. So like if you like soccer or like music or a specific type of animal or something, like those are all examples of a topic you could pick. And then from that topic, list out possible topics and ideas that you can write about. So like for example, if my topic were to be um, like sharks or something, then maybe under like sharks, I would write ideas that have to do with sharks. So maybe I would say a shark who becomes a lawyer and starts solving underwater crimes. Or I could put like a shark who's vegetarian and learns to befriend fish, um, or like because their friend is a fish and they learn to eat coral or something. Well, corals are actually living things, so that wouldn't work. But like you get the point, right? So the point of this is just to choose the topic that interests you the most and that you think you can write the most on. So yeah, if you're writing something, like you're usually gonna want the thing you're writing about to interest you, because that way you can really sustain the story. And like if you're interested in what you're writing, usually you can really tell in the writing. So yeah, next you want to consider your audience. So basically you're just considering your readers. And ask yourself, who are you writing for? Because a book that's for children is like the tone and the way of writing and things is gonna be really different from a book for like adults or maybe like seniors or older people. So, or you can even like say like your audience is like all ages, but like there's different ways you can categorize people, and like you can do it for people who maybe were bullied when they were younger, or you can be writing for people who live in a certain country and like miss their home country, or like even like people who like sports or people who have a certain interest, or like of course you don't have to always do this, but it can be helpful just to have a picture in mind of who you're writing for, and then that kind of gives you more of a concrete goal to write towards. Um, so yeah, that's just your audience. And then next is just drafting. So for drafting, um, like you're just beginning, right? So a lot of people, what they experience is that they look down at the page and it's just like this blank white page, like the one in this picture, and like they get kind of like nervous, like they don't want to like make a mark on the page and like ruin it, right? Like they're scared that their writing like won't be good. But like at this stage of writing, you don't have to worry about any of that. You just want to start writing. Just like put your pen or pencil on the page, or like start typing, and like just like start going, right? Because your only goal for drafting is to get the main ideas down onto the page. You want to have that kind of framework that you can work around for revising and editing. So like you don't have to worry about making it your best work. This is just the first draft. It can be as bad as you want it to be, or like um, because like after this, you're gonna revise and edit it, and that's where you start adding details that you might have missed, or like changing sentences to flow better and all that good stuff. So it's kind of like this picture, right? You're just taking what's in your mind and you're putting it down on paper, and that's all you're really doing. So next, revisions. I know you guys already know these, but just for a little bit of review. So first you're just adding details. Like, if you think a part is too kind of vague and you don't think that the reader would be able to picture it that well or be that immersed into it, you can add things like imagery or emotions or dialogue, or for things that are more on the informational um, fiction side, like hmm, uh, like if you're writing about people in a certain country or something, like fictional characters in like a country, like or something like that, you could add like facts, statistics, and examples. Which but usually that won't happen too often in like sort of fiction, creative writing, because like usually that's associated with like nonfiction and informational writing, like expository text, right? So then, just deleting unnecessary information. Make sure like you don't have anything that's redundant, and so the sentences can flow better. You can combine or remove ideas. Like if you notice you have too many of these short sentences, you can combine some of those sentences with like coordinating or subordinating conjunctions, and that's definitely gonna help with the flow. Because the thing with writing is that you don't want too much repetition. Like you want to mix it up a little and have like variation in your sentences. So if all your sentences are just the same form, then it might get tiring to read. So you want to make sure you have some simple sentences here and some um some complex sentences there, and like just like add commas, um and the conjunctions we talked about and all of that. And that's just to improve your variation and make it a lot more enjoyable to read. Sometimes you're even gonna want like for parts with a lot of action, you might even use words with or sentences with just one word. Like or like two words like oh no or something like that, right? And that changing it up like that might help with the action. And it might convey to the readers a sense of the action. So, and then you just want to rearrange for clarity and effect. Again, just make sure your writing flows smoothly. Like like in your draft, if one part like seems kind of out of place, you might want to like move it to another section. So so yeah, and just remember that like revisions, like it usually takes many revisions to create a final draft. Um, 'Cause like very few times are you gonna just write something and then revise and edit, and then like on the first um on the first revision, it's already like your final draft, right? Like usually you're gonna look back on it and you're gonna see even more mistakes and even more ways you can improve it. And then you go back and you revise and edit it again. And then you do that until you're happy with it. And you're not necessarily done with it because, of course, there's always mistakes to be made, but you're happy with it and it sounds good. And then yeah, that could be your final draft. And maybe even sometime in the future, when you're when you know more about writing or like things like that, you might even want to go back and then see your final draft and see even more ways you can improve it, or even more mistakes that you might have missed. And then you can try revising it again. And that's good practice to see how much you've improved. Now, a plot is just the sequence of actions in a story. So for plot, you want to make sure everything that happens in the story contributes to the story's progression. So, like if you have a random piece of text in your story that doesn't really do anything to further the story, and it's just kind of there, and it's just kind of like sitting still, then chances are you probably don't need that section very much. So the things that happen in your story, like it has to carry the story forward. Um, so yeah, um, like I'm sure you guys have seen this. Okay, excuse me. So I'm sure you guys have seen this like many times. It's just a plot diagram, with beginning, middle, and end. So exposition. It's just like kind of sort of like an introduction. You're just introducing this like the characters and the story and everything. And then the conflict, and rising action, and then climax, where the character makes a peak decision that turns the story around. Like when something happens that forces the character to change something or something like that. And then falling action, down to the resolution, which leads to the end of the story. So now characters. So characters are really important to a story, um, because a story, even if the story itself is really good, some people might not enjoy it because of the characters. So you want to make sure that your story is good and your characters are also good. So first, you want to know your characters and establish relationships between characters. So like if you're writing about um, a person, first of all, their relationships would be like who's their closest friend, right? Like if they have a friend in the story, maybe that's the friend that they go to, like whenever they're in hardships, like that friend can like help them, and like they can help their friend, or like maybe another friend, like uh, like they just know from school, and they don't really see each other outside of school. So like you see how there's different relationships that you can establish between these characters, and just knowing your characters really contributes to a story. So even knowing like little things, like maybe their favorite food, can help you kind of know the character better. And it's good to like kind of see your character as a real person, because then you can um know better how they would react in certain situations, or how they would act in the story. And that's important because you want to make sure characters are consistent, right? So like if a character is really like logical and careful in things, like they're not gonna be like jumping over fences probably, right? Like just as an example. So yeah, you should know like how your characters act, things like that. And then you just want to create meaningful characters. They should generally be likable and relatable. Because like have you ever read a story where like you're just reading it and like the characters are just really bad? Like I'm sure we've all been there. Like the characters, they're just unlikable, or they just keep making really bad decisions just over and over again. And like it starts to get like tiring, right? Like after a while, you don't really care about the story because you don't care about what happens to the character. And that's not good because the whole purpose of the story is like the character like achieving something or solving some problem, right? So the reader, you should make it so that they care about the character and they care what happens to it or what happens to them. And usually you can do this by also like making them relatable. So like this goes back to like writing for a certain audience, right? So you want to relate to that audience. Like for example, um well, of course you can do like research and things, but what a lot of people do is also they base a character off themselves. And because they already have like those experiences and things that are the same as the character, they already know how the character should feel and um like what the character would act like and things like that. So yeah, a lot of people do that. Um and you want to basically relate your character to that audience. So like for example, right? Like if your character is um like Hispanic, for example, like then you would put like kind of elements of that culture like in that character, um and like maybe family dynamics and things like are different than if you're one race than another usually. So like people who are Hispanic, if they read that writing and first of all they see their race represented by that character, and second of all they can relate to that character and the way the character goes through life and things, and maybe like the way they act around their family, then like that's really good because um they're gonna like see themselves in the character, they're gonna care about what happens to the character, and they're probably gonna like enjoy the character in general. So next, the characters should learn and grow throughout the story. So again, like just make sure your characters don't like stay the same, because at the end of the story, if the character is like the exact same as they were in the beginning, then you're gonna be like, well, what was the point, right? Like, what was the point of going through like this whole story and like this conflict and like everything this character did if at the like end of it they're just exactly the same person? So like sometimes the character can like um well I mean that goes into the next point, which is just by the end of the story the characters should have changed in some way. So like as I was saying, sometimes the characters, like they can change their values, or they can change their perspective and thoughts on certain things and things like that. Because like if you go through this whole situation, like you're gonna learn something from it. So um, and then you just want to make sure that the character's actions are what drives the story. So like the actions that the characters do again are used to further the plot. So when you're creating characters, basically you want to consider things like physical appearance, so like height, eye color, hair, and more. And you want to consider their personality and their values, their past, so like a backstory, and their interests and likes or dislikes. So things like past are like pretty important usually, especially if you're writing like a longer story, because even if you don't include their backstory inside the story, knowing what happened to them in the past and things can help you know how they react to things inside the story. Um, like for example, in the past, if they had an encounter with a spider on their bed, now they might be really afraid of spiders. And maybe they also have a hard time sleeping. So, like, things that happen in your past shape who you are today as a person, and you want to apply that to your characters. And these other things, it's like seeing your character as a friend, right? Or seeing the character as someone you know. Um, just like being able to imagine them as you write them, and that's can be really helpful. So now, there's flat versus round characters. So you're not gonna go through all of these with like all of your characters, because some characters are more important than others, right? So a round character is fully developed, so we know lots about that character. Readers might even be able to anticipate the actions of a round character if the characterization is well done and consistent. So like earlier with the example of a person being careful, like you can think like they're not going to jump a fence or something. Or maybe in a situation or like something that happens in the story, you can like predict what the character is going to do because you know what that character is like and you know what they've done in past situations. And then a flat character we know little about. Flat characters are not meant to serve as main characters. They serve as necessary elements in plot or as elements of the setting. So yeah, flat characters basically they're just there to move the plot along. So usually you'll see flat characters help the main character or in some way. And very often, the flat character will just be there for like a while and then like not be there for the rest of the story. So flat characters are just elements of the plot basically that that just help like carry on the story. So flat characters, you're usually not going to know as much about them. Like, of course, like if you're willing to, it's actually good to like know a lot of details about every character in your story. Because then that really helps you fully flesh out the story. And like in your mind, the story is like kind of like it's really like it's kind of like real, right? Like it's like it just helps contribute to that feeling of just being there in the story and the readers can tell, right? Like when you've fully planned out the story, and it makes it just a really enjoyable experience to like read that. So there's also static characters and dynamic characters. So some characters stay the same throughout the story, and they're called static characters, while dynamic characters change due to events in the story. So this is like what we talked about earlier, right? With like how characters should change by the end of the story and they should learn and grow in some way. Well, that's usually only for main characters. Like, um, like static characters, like especially flat characters, like usually they're gonna stay the same throughout the whole story. And like that's okay, because you just want to focus on the main characters, or like the characters that are the most important to the story. Um, so yeah, now let's just look at some examples. So um so example one. Once Inge had turned 1 year old, the Nuremberg Law was passed. Okay. Young young Inge never acknowledged the change that occurred within her household. The news came in the Sunday paper and brought emotional despair onto the family. The law forbade marriages between Germans and Jews, and therefore threatened the marriage of Inge's parents. David, being a German, was to leave Anneliese and their children, or else he would be considered as one of them. However, Inge's dad was persistent in staying by the side of her mom and her siblings, but this sacrificed his Aryan race. Anneliese was heartbroken. Her tear her tears fell like rain onto the cold stone floor. Anne and Bella, who were more mature than Inge and her brother, thought of this as nothing painful and found the situation something that will brighten their dull school life. So yeah, can you guys tell what genre of creative writing this is? Okay, so basically this is historical fiction because uh okay, yeah, that's correct. So it's historical fiction. So good job. So it's like talking about this law that was passed, and like during like World War II and things. So like this, is talking about a set like the history is like part of the setting. So like it's a historical setting, but the characters in the story are made up. Um, so yeah. And then example two, you guys might recognize this uh, as the beginning of Harry Potter, which is Harry Potter is like a very well-known, like good piece of like fantasy. And it definitely does a good job of making readers feel like they're a part of the world, which is why so many people, like one of the reasons why so many people enjoy it so much. So, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was a director of a film called Grunnings, which made, or a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mu mustache, okay. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful, as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. So we're just gonna stop there because like all you really get from this is basically the descriptions used to describe Mr. Dursley and Mrs. Dursley. So like, cause like usually for things like personality and things, you're not gonna just like tell the reader what a character's personality is, cause the reader can figure that out through the character's actions, right? But things like physical appearance, usually that's how authors will introduce a character. So with Mr. Oh, sorry about that. So like with Mr. Dursley, you can really picture him, right? You can picture him being like this big man with like a really small neck and like this giant mustache, and then you can picture Mrs. Dursley like as very thin and like blonde hair, right? And then like a really long neck. Um, and like these descriptions are really good because like of course you can't describe every aspect of what they look like, but you can describe the most prominent features or the features that you notice first. Like when you look at something or someone, like there's going to be features that you notice before other features. So like sometimes you're not going to notice their eyes immediately, right? But like say their eyes are just this really pretty like color and like this really unique shade of a color. And then like sometimes their eyes are going to be the first thing you notice. And usually that's going to be just the description that authors choose to use. Um, so then example 3. The house stood on a slight rise just on the edge of the village. It stood on its own and looked over a broad spread of West Country farmland. Not a remarkable house by any means. It was about 30 years old, squarish, made of brick, and had 4 windows set in the front of a size and proportion which more or less exactly failed to please the eye. So you can really picture this house, right? It's talking about the where the house is, um, and it talks about like what this house looks like, um, and it makes sure to focus on the most important features of this house. And then next, it goes on to describe the character. The only person for whom the house was in any way special was Arthur Dent, and that was only because it happened to be the one he lived in. He had lived in it for almost 3 years, ever since he had moved out of London, because it made him nervous and irritable. He was about 30 as well, dark-haired, and never quite at ease with himself. The thing that used to worry him most was the fact that people always used to ask him what he was looking so worried about. He worked in a local radio, which he always used to tell his friends was a lot more interesting than they probably thought. It was, too. Most of his friends worked in advertising. So yeah, you can picture this guy as being like 30 years old and dark-haired, and you can kind of picture him like worrying and about a lot of things. And that like tells you a lot since that's like the biggest part of his personality, which is shown here. Um, so yeah, definitely it's important how you begin your story because if the reader like begins your story and they don't like how it's going for like the first page or even the first sentence, then they're a lot less likely to continue reading. So you want to have a strong beginning that interests the reader, um, and then you just want to like when you introduce the character, you want to be really purposeful in the way that you do that. So like focus on the important things and just like it's just like a brief overview, because um the reader's gonna get to know the character more and more the more the story progresses. So yeah, like introducing the character, it's just a short introduction. So yeah, does anyone have any questions on like creative writing or any of the things that we've discussed? Okay, cool. No questions. Let's move on to the homework. So, the homework is just to practice creative writing. Uh, so you should brainstorm, plan, and write a draft to a fiction creative writing story. Revise and edit your draft at least once. And then I want you to write at least one full page. Okay, so any questions on that? Uh, Okay, cool. So just like choose any topic that you're interested in, or like think of any idea that you want to write about, and just write a page about it. And for the first draft, just like get it down on the paper, get the main ideas down, and after that, just revise and edit until you think it's good. Or like if you don't have much time, just like revise and edit at least once. So yeah, that's the end of the class. Um, thank you guys for coming and for participating. And so, bye. I hope you have a good time on the homework, which I'll send to you shortly, like later after class. So yeah, you can leave now unless you have questions.
Bye.